So welcome everybody. I am Preeti Joshi. I am the Vice President of RSVP, and this is the digital events. This is our third digital events event for the year. And I just want to take a quick moment and introduce the digital events subcommittee to you all, so you know who we are. And so if you're on camera, go ahead and wave your hands. We have, let's see, looking around, Ali Hatapchi, who is coming from Dijon and has the perfect meteorological voice. We have, let's see, who else do we have here? I know I saw Andrew Hobbs, but Andrew may have his camera off. So Andrew Hobbs is also in the Digital Events Committee. Saurav Chatterjee, I see there with the earth in his backdrop. Yeah, we have Katie Birch on the committee. I don't see Katie, and somebody remind me who I'm missing. Am I missing somebody? No, I got everybody. Okay. So wonderful group of people. We're lots of we sort of try to do monthly events. And at the end I will tell you what our next event is, but we've waited long enough. So I am going to just very quickly introduce Claire. And then Claire will introduce her colleagues, Emily and Anne, and we'll get going. So Clare Horrocks is a cultural historian from Liverpool John Moores University, and Claire specializes in research on the Victorian periodical press, specifically Punch. Um, she's been developing a collaboration over years with Gail Sengage, and worked on the transcription of the Punch contributor ledgers. And she's now working, excuse me, with the editors of the current index on a major project identifying the women contributors of Punch, which she'll talk about today. She's organized a series of events and publications for 2024 to mark the 10th anniversary of Gail's Punch Historical Archive. She has published widely on Punch and is a member of RSVP and is also a submissions editor for Victorian Periodicals Review. So please welcome Claire, and off we go.
Thanks, Preeti. It's not a very auspicious start to a digital project when the person can't log on. So apologies for keeping people waiting. Emily, are you able to share my slides now, please?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do in today's presentation is just to give you some context for this specific project on the women of Punch, before moving into some of the context for the International Women's Day theme that we have used to inform this project. The theme for this year is to inspire inclusion, which we're hoping with this project we will be able to do. I then want to think about moving from the sort of static exhibition platform to thinking about archiving and what role platforms like Wix, which we've used, will facilitate us to build. So if you could move on to the next slide, Emily, please.
Is that showing the next slide?
It's not showing at my side. Is it moved? I'm obviously having all the technical difficulties today. So basically, on the slides, what I've done is set out the presentation for today.
Yeah, it should have done. I know it was having.
There we are. Okay. So we've got the outline for today's presentation, which I've just talked through. And my colleagues that you can see who are sat together are Emily Parsons, and she's going to be talking about our 19th century press collection at John Moores and this new online exhibition space that we have been using, before handing over to Anne, who has been the technical whiz behind all of this, is going to talk about Wix and some of the logistics of creating a digital exhibition. So if you can move on to the next slide, please, Emily. So a lot of the work that I did on this has been facilitated by our Head of Academic Services, Susanna Waters, and I just wanted to acknowledge as well the work of a couple of our undergraduates who've been helping and doing some of the archiving work with us. So on this context slide that you should be able to see, if we move on to the context slide, this is stage 2 of the Punch Contributor Ledgers project at Liverpool John Moores University. As Brittany said at the beginning, the initial project was in collaboration with Gail Sengage, and this was to work through the attribution data that was held in ledgers at the British Library. So working through that, we've catalogued from 1843 through to 1919. And those ledgers are now available open access with the current index. And I've been working with Lars and Emily on writing some introductory pieces and about using some of the data in the current index. So this particular project on the Women of Punch began back in 2015 as part of a wider project on into the International Centre for Victorian Women Writers at Canterbury Christchurch. I worked with my colleague who's here, pictured here, Nikki Ann Moody, who a number of you will have known and known well or have worked with. And the first piece of work that we collaborated on was on Matilda Betham Edwards, who was the first women contributor to Punch. So this had set a large project up, which was then stalled due to the loss of Nikki Ann and also illness on my part. But in the summer of 2023, if you can move to the next slide, please, I had the opportunity to work with Carolyn Oulton at Canterbury again on a piece for the 1890s volume of their work, which is looking from Bloomsbury, from Bronte to Bloomsbury, looking at the work of women writers. And I was invited to continue some of the work that I'd started previously on Ada Leveson, Punch and the Yellow Book. So last year, I was working and starting to look at Ada Leveson, who was actually one of the most prolific female contributors to Punch. She's quite often studied in relation to the social circles in which she moved, particularly Oscar Wilde and people like Max Beerbohm. What's really interesting is the number of pieces that she contributed, with 42 being attributed in the ledgers. And I'm going to make this distinction as I go through that we've worked specifically with the ledgers. There are other pieces that people have found that we're verifying to see if they are actually attributable to that person. But then what we're starting to do is start to have a think about how we attribute when it's not registered or if it's registered under a male pseudonym. So this was the piece that I was working on last year, looking specifically at the 1890s and how there was this rising wit of women contributors and quite a very distinct style of satire that they were using. Next slide, please, Emily. But I realised at the end of this project that I was only really scratching the surface of the attributions that we'd identified and pulled down from the ledgers. On this next slide, you can start to see some of the ways that we've been cataloguing across the volume, the issue, the title and the author across the period from 1868, when Matilda Betham Edwards makes first contribution, through into the 1900s. There's over 136 entries for women contributors up to 1900. And I wanted to think about a way that I could work with others and start to identify some of these other writers that have been attributed in the ledgers. So, as I said, I've done work with Nikki Ann on Matilda Betham Edwards. I know that Katie Birch has done quite a lot of work on May Kendall, and then Ada Leveson piece, which will be out later this year. Now, Katie, in her article for Alexis Easley, looking at women's periodicals, starts to look at Miss Ray and a Rosaline Masson. But we're only really scratching the surface of who some of these women were. So I was trying to think of a way to identify who these people were and to start to sort of pierce that sort of curtain of sort of anonymity and attribution. Next slide, please. So last year, I'm starting to look at this. There's an increase in interest in author attribution projects that's come through with the great work that Gary Simons has done on the Curran Index, which has been continued by Lars and Emily. And there's been a number of really interesting essays coming out around attribution scholarship, and also the digital roundtable that was organised in October last year by Lars and Emily. And it got me thinking about the importance of not just having a name, but actually starting to think about who some of these people were. At the same time, it came to my attention that the UN was working on a major project for International Women's Day. Next slide, please, Emily. Which was around the theme of digital for 2023. So this theme was intending to address innovation and technology for gender inequality. One of their forecalls was to remove all barriers to access the digital world. Now, the debates about the importance of open access of academic resources have raged on for many years, since the first digital archives of 19th century resources began to appear behind subscription walls with companies like ProQuest, Gale Cengage and Adam Matthew. My work on the Punch Contributor Ledgers project at John Moores was in partnership with Gale. However, all of the transcriptions were released to the Curran Index in order to make them more accessible to a wider audience. So whilst the Gale Cengage Punch Historical Archive makes the attribution data available alongside the articles themselves, the Curran Index obviously will just give the attribution. Now, whilst there are more sites like the Hathi Trust offering free online versions of the magazine, scholars are able to advance the studies of this satirical magazine. But in my recent project on the Women of Punch, what we wanted to do was to get the data directly from the ledgers alongside the pieces of work themselves, so that scholars could study the two together. International Women's Day provided me with an opportunity to create a project that would bring together not only a list of all of those women contributors, but also digital images of the pieces that they had written. And so in September last year, the Women of Punch project was begun. Next slide, please. So International Women's Day this year has the theme hashtag Inspire Inclusion. International Women's Day has been celebrated on the 8th of March every year since 1911. However, in 1911, it was only honoured in Austria, Denmark, Germany and Switzerland from that time, and on the 19th of March. So after a process of international collaboration and discussion, it was decided that International Women's Day would follow the Gregorian calendar and be commemorated on the 8th of March. So on the 8th of March 1914, there was a march in support of women's suffrage from Bow to Trafalgar Square in London. And this was to become the first participation in International Women's Day activities for Britain. So 2024 thus marks 110 years of celebrating women's achievements, and it seems an appropriate time to make the voices of the 19th century women of Punch heard and accessible to a wider audience. Writing on the 11th of March 1914 in Punch, N.R. Martin described the march from Bow to Trafalgar in a piece labelled The End of It All. Now, whilst no biographical data exists to help us identify who N.R. Martin was, it can be presumed that this was not the voice of a female contributor. But here was a piece that satirised the militant ways of the WSPU, the bewhiskered men wearing green and white wigs, making a mockery of the purple, green and white worn by the suffragettes and the colours which are still used for International Women's Day today. How ironic that the spectacle witnessed that day was indeed the beginning of it all, rather than its end. For so too, as the turn of the century witnessed a change in women's roles, so too did Punch see an increase in the number of women writers contributing to the magazine. For the first time then, this project, the Women of Punch, will identify those voices and make their work available to scholars. In line with the 2024 theme of International Women's Day to inspire inclusion, it's hoped that this project will facilitate scholars across the world to begin to identify and engage with this exciting range of voices in order that we can incorporate their research and work into our project. In this way, we are, quote, removing barriers, unquote, to studying the voice of the female contributor and as International Women's Day advocates, promoting creative and artistic talent of women in girls in a call to celebrate women's achievements. Next slide, please, Emily. So, in this way, the project was brought together with the idea that the data would be available alongside the images themselves. So we began a process of double checking the attribution spreadsheets which were created from the first phase of the Punch Contributor Ledgers project. We then cross-reference these with the ledgers in their hard copies, which we have in the Special Collections and Archives at John Moores. And as you can see from the image on the right, reading through these has been no small challenge in verifying this data. But as you can see highlighted there is one of the pieces from a Miss Masson from 1898. And there were spelling errors in the attribution that needed correcting. And Miss Masson was a good example because originally had been found in the database as Mason, which could have not helped with this problem of identifying. So we've gone through and verified all of that transcription data by going back to the raw sources, correcting any errors, verifying the attribution data and adding amendments. Then one of the things that we decided to do was to add notes columns where we could put additional information as we start to identify those authors. Now, some of those have been done and have been linked to work from myself, Nick Yan, Katie Birch, through the exhibition that we're going to show you online. But there is scope, the way that we've set this out, for those notes columns to be added to as people make discoveries or work with the information that's in this online exhibition. Next slide, please. So once we've verified all of the data, made the corrections and amendments and set the spreadsheet up, what we needed to do was actually locate all of those articles from 2 lines to 2 columns. The 2 lines, very small jokes that are around between 2 and 5 lines, very difficult to find, and provided a bit of a challenge for the 2 students that you see here, Grace and Abby, who worked with me to find all of those 136 pieces. What we had to do then was to mark out in each of the corresponding volume of Punch where those pieces were and the length of them so that we could tag the work ready for scanning. And this was where we then handed over to the Special Collections and Archives team. That's why they're so integral to the project and why they're here to talk to you today. Next slide, please. So because this is an International Women's Day project, we did decide that we were going to organise the exhibition within the themes of the International Women's Day site. Now, these 3 themes were around the original colours of the WSPU that I mentioned earlier, with the purple, green and white, around justice and dignity, hope and purity. However, I found as I was going through that we needed another theme. There was a lot of commentary on society, community. Alexis Easley's done a lot of work about the notion of celebrity in this latter period. So I was looking for a colour to tie this together. And we've chosen red, which was actually the colour of the NUWSS SS, which was the non-militant group, and their colours were actually linked with red and white and green themselves. So they're very different colour, but still tied in with that theme of suffrage. Now, it may seem an arbitrary way to organise this, but we wanted to correlate with the International Women's Day theme. However, we are aware that this might not be the way that 19th century scholars would want to go into this. So what we have done is that we've also got a browse the full collection so that you can just work through this as an archive in its own right. Next slide, please. So this is where I think that we are crossing over into some interesting discussions about the term exhibition and the term archive, because this isn't a static exhibition. This is something that is interactive. It's been designed to work with scholars and to bring together collaborative attribution. In that way, we're including more scholars' work, but by doing that, we're then opening up to include more potential contributors that we can identify, and then whose biographical detail we can add to the site, and which I can then send over and correlate with the current index as well. So we've got people like Mrs. Asher, for example, with over 16 contributions in 1894, and yet no data for who that person was. It may be that we will struggle to find some of this, but we wanted to set up a site that was modelled on the Dickens Journal's online site, whereby people could contribute and offer suggestions for adding to the site, and also for adding other articles or pieces that have been written that may not be in the ledgers that we can evidence as being by that person. So I worked with Gary Simons a few years back, and we did a very similar article where we actually found pieces by Thackeray that weren't in the ledger, but that we could argue were indeed by Thackeray. So we're opening up that opportunity to contribute and to add to this archive so that we can collaborate more widely across the RSVP community. And in that way, the term exhibition is an interesting one, and I think one that's open for discussion. But what I think is really interesting is the way in which the Wix site has been built, which we're going to talk you through and show you some examples from before we open up for questions. So next slide, I posed a question. You may think, what is Wix, or why did you use it? And why is the institution starting to invest in these online exhibition initiatives? And to do that, I'm going to hand over to Anne and Emily to run through some of the more practical side of what we've been doing and how we've set everything up on the Women of Punch. And we'll start to show you some of the pages and some of the access to the material that you can use. Over to you, Emily and Anne.
Lovely. I'm going to swap the slides over, and then I'll reshare my screen. It's just taking a moment to connect, I think. So can you see that now?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can see
Are you sharing properly?
Yeah, that's fine.
Says I can now see you. Good, good. Check before I started. So I'm Emily. I'm the archivist here at LJMU. So I'm just going to give you a brief bit of background to us and our collections, and then I'll move on to sort of the background to the digital exhibition. So we are open Monday to Friday. We're open to the public as well as external researchers and our own staff and students. This is just the sort of slide that we use for all of our new students when we give them inductions, so the normal kind of reading room rules. We are in a basement, of course, because we're in the archives. And just a little bit of a summary of the collections that we hold. So we do have over 60 different collections. So there's a lot of material. And as you can see from some of the images here, it is predominantly 20th century, but there are some key 19th century materials that we have been growing over the last sort of 10, 15 years, maybe more actually. And that includes Punch and the 19th century periodicals, and also the Little Heart collection of costume, which is a 19th century fashion library. So we do have a significant amount of Victorian material, but also a lot of 20th century material, as you can see. So this is the 19th century periodicals that we have in the reading room. So you can sort of see a summary of the types of things that we have. And just one moment. Where are we? So this is just literally a picture of our reading room. So you can see the variety of different periodicals. You've got Punch on the left there, and then the Strand, and then we've got shorter runs of various other periodicals. So the Punch we'd had for a very long time. It'd just been hidden away. No one really knew it was there. The strand we acquired specifically for a research project at that time, but it now gets regularly used by our English students. And the rest of the 19th century periodicals in this collection started off with a core collection from Brian Maidment, and then we've built on it since then as well. So it is quite a developing collection still, and is becoming much more well used over the years. So as Claire mentioned, there's a couple of key projects where we've been working with her and with Brian for one of them as well, on these 19th century periodicals and Punch specifically. So we had an exhibition in 2013, which seems like a very long time ago now, and then the contributor register project as well, which we worked with Claire on to support. So in terms of our online presence, we do have web pages buried within the LJMU web pages. We are kind of rethinking it at the moment so we can be a bit more visible, but also to reduce the amount of pages. We do have an online catalogue as well, so we are gradually adding to that. Not everything's on there at the moment, but it's great for people searching, and it's linked to our library search system as well. But it's not particularly visually appealing. It's great for finding the information and being able to request things, but it doesn't necessarily look very pretty. It's not very good for exhibitions. So we purchased Wix, and I'm just trying to think what year it was. In 2022, we actually got the system. We have the unlimited version. We did play around with the free version for a little while, but it doesn't have much capacity for storage. So we have got the unlimited version at the moment. I think the range has changed slightly, so I think the price structure has changed a little bit. They've renamed it. But we got the system in 2022 and then launched it with the first exhibition in May 2023, which is this Finding Captain Morgan. So this was the result of a year-long internship by some history students working with an academic in history. And they were cataloguing this collection that was donated, and then curated a physical and digital exhibition. So they worked in tandem. And then the Everyman posters just started this year, right at the very beginning of this year. We worked with our graphic students on a project for them to design some posters for an exhibition. So we're going to have an exhibition later in the year and a series of connected events. So in order to do that and give them access to the digital files, we've made them available online. So it's pretty much just a gallery organised by Decade from the Liverpool Everyman Theatre. And we're going to be building on that as time goes on. But that was the result of a large format scanning project that we did last year. So it was great to be able to put that material out there so that people could see all of that. So I'm going to pass over to Anne now to talk a bit more about the technical side of things, and then we'll be able to show you the exhibition as it is now, the new exhibition.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to take you through really the process of photographing the magazines. As you can see, they're much too fragile to be scanned, so the overhead camera is used with some studio lights that are controlled. The overhead lights in the room have to be switched off, and the exposure has to be consistent, and the height at which the camera is at has to remain the same. So yeah, it's consistency that you're after here on a project like this. Let's have a look here. Yeah, I capture in Camera Raw, and then a batch process is done in Photoshop. And then the files are then converted over to JPEG for Wix. So the reason why the exposure has to be consistent is that sometimes, well, you want the images to display it at exactly the same brightness, if you like, on screen. So if that exposure is not correct, then one will be bright and the next one dark. So that's really important. Same with the height of the camera. It has to stay the same height, otherwise the zoom tool in Wix will not be consistent, and therefore the magnification is different with each image. And then, yeah, you've noticed the color checker on the image as well there on screen. Well, that's just to help me correct the image and get the colors right at the time of capture, and keep that data attached to the image for the future. So we then have a way of storing our images. We store master files, we make a copy of that master file, and then we have like a working image that we go to make our images available. So yeah, the next one. So that's a bit about the process of capturing the image. And here on screen we've got working with Wix. Well, you can see that the images are then uploaded into the media area of Wix. So you do all your Photoshop, everything, get your images spot on before you load them up into that. Otherwise, you're left with working with Wix's kind of like photo editor, which is a bit clunky and doesn't always work. So my advice to you, if you're doing a project like this on Wix, is to get your images accurate and then make the upload. So they sit within folders, and I've just chosen to do folders by year, sorry, rather than by the themes. Because if you look at the middle image, that's where Claire's spreadsheet that the students were working on, that was then handed to me in Excel, converted to CSV file, and then uploaded onto Wix's own content manager. So that's just one content manager, and from there you can just connect to the information in there to display on Wix. So it's kind of like one area, and then the pages that you create and the data you want to show on the page just kind of grabs it from that content manager. So you can see I've just shown you an example there how it does that with the gallery view. And yeah, you just have areas. So at this point I'll say that I'm not a web developer. I've got no training in that. My background is in photography, but I've actually found Wix really easy to use just by watching the tutorials online. So yeah, have a go. It's okay, and it's quite good fun actually once you start building your site. But if we go to the next. Oh yeah, on this page, I just want to show you how in the beginning I sat down with Claire and I came up with some ideas of how to display the text, because as Claire said, some of the articles, they're only a couple of lines long, and would the viewer be able to find that easily on the page? Well, we experimented with different designs and then just decided actually the viewers, it's best to show the original page and just let the viewer do the searching online with the Zoom tool kind of thing. So yeah, we tried it, but we didn't use it. So yeah. Also at the beginning stage, you're looking at themes in the way of using colours to display those themes, and coming up with a design idea quite early on. And then you need to kind of break down those pages and have an idea of what you're going to put on each page and how you're going to link that. So you can see here the Women in Punch one has 8 other sub pages, and that's all. So it's not as complex as it seems like to build a website. You've just got to think, how do I want the viewer to navigate around it? So yeah, next page. I think at this point we're probably gonna let you see the exhibition.
Yeah.
If this will work, we'll go live.
Yep. So I'll see whether this link works. Otherwise, I might have to stop sharing and start sharing again, because I'm not sure where it's going to come out. Okay, let's just. I think I might have to reshare a different screen. Hang on. Yeah, there we go. Oops. Where's Zoom gone? I've lost it. I wonder if we've disconnected actually. I feeling we might have disconnected. Hang on.
No.
It's fine.
No, you are on.
Oh, you are on.
We
Okay.
are on.
I can't. I seem to have lost how to see you all. It's disappeared. It's a bit strange. Okay. So what are you seeing at the moment?
Just you two.
Okay. I don't know where that's gone. Hang on. It's very odd. I think there might be multiple tabs open here. Oh, hang on. There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Right. What I need to do is pull that one out of it. That's better. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Slight technical errors there. Right. So I will share the screen. Hopefully this will be the right screen that I'm sharing.
Yeah.
Yep, lovely. So I don't know whether Claire, you want to sort of talk through this or?
Yeah, so if we click on the view the exhibition or visit the exhibition, which is on the front page.
Hang on a minute. I think it might have clicked open the wrong thing. It's being very slow. Let's just try this again. Right. Yes, it's just thinking about it for a moment. There we go.
It's not because
Yeah.
that's running.
I think, yeah, it's probably a bandwidth thing that's it's taking it a little moment to load everything. Just because we're running that and that at the same time. So I think maybe if I mute as well, that.
Okay, so if you scroll down, Emily, we can see from the opening here that we've got our sort of cover image, which is from Maud Sanborn. I think there's some interesting work to be done on Maud Sanborn as an artist herself. And I think that there's potential for developing this project further to start to include some of those artists as well. And I know Katie's been doing some work on the artists as well. If we scroll down, then we've got some of the context for the project that we've discussed with you today. But I think the more interesting part is how to use the resource. So each of these links will take you through to a section that will give you advice for using it. If we can click on the collaborative attribution, and hopefully that will work, you can see there on the first how the site's organised, which is either through the themes or through the full catalogue. If we go back, I think the more important tab that we've set up is the collaborative attribution tab, whereby people can add information or make suggestions. What we will be doing with that is that I will be collating those inquiries and we'll be then updating those every 3 to 6 months and posting as we add those. So there's the opportunity for you to contact us directly. We'll go through, we'll verify that data, and then we'll add that. And I will cross-reference that with the entries that the current index has also got. So if we go back, there's some of the backgrounds that I've talked about today on International Women's Day. But I think the most important thing to do really is to show some of the work that we've done with the actual pieces themselves. So if we scroll down below how to use the site and the resources, we've got the full collection. So if you could click on one of those just as a sample, Emily, you'll be able to see that it opens up a much larger screen, whereby you've got the piece itself. So this is the first one from Matilda Betham Edwards, Mrs. Punch's letters to her daughters. We've identified the illustrators, whether it's the initial letters or whether it's a main sort of piece within that, by using the signatures that are listed in the back of the Spielman book for recognising artists. And then, as Emily's just shown you, you've got the functionality to be able to zoom in. We've also got up in the top left-hand corner the option, which we won't do now for fear of slowing everything down, the option to download the piece as well that you can use, or to take it to full screen. So you can move through the pieces by clicking on the arrow. If you want to scroll through, that's on the middle right-hand side of the screen, and start to have a look at the series as it evolves going through the different pieces. Or if we click out of this, what you'll see is the way that, as I discussed in my presentation at the beginning, that you can see the themes that are below. So if we scroll down, you can see the International Women's Day themes, which are collated under social and community, hope, purity, justice and dignity. And as I say, I think there's work to be done here just around how these themes have evolved, why they're still central to International Women's Day, but how they were also central to the period at that time. And then if we just scroll down to the bottom, you can see the Hope Gallery, for example, where we've collated them. It will depend which route you want to go into these and to think about some of the themes that are being conveyed here. But if we go back out of here, you can see at the bottom of the page a link to those important projects that I think are very much part of this project and who've worked with us on it. So at the bottom of the page, we've got links to the current index if people wish to go and verify any of the data or cross-reference it with other pieces. We've also got links to Gale. That's obviously slightly more problematic if people haven't got subscription, but the Gale site now, as part of this 10th anniversary this year, is updating its resources. So there is a resource bank with Gale that you can get through that tab, whereby you can have a look at sample searches using themes. So I've worked with people like Jennifer Fegley, for example, on putting some of those essays together, as well as Patrick and Brian. So they're all available through the Gale tab, the current index, and then also where the project began really with Carolyn Alton and her team, and the International Centre for Victorian Women Writers. So if you want to follow through any of those initiatives or links to some of those publications, then you can follow those through. In the annotations for the pieces, if we can just scroll back up, Emily, I've tried not to lead, and these are not so much where I've sort of given you a comment on the pieces that will tell you how to read that. But if there has been specific discussion about any of those pieces, then I've linked them in the further information and resources. So, for example, some of the work that Katie's been doing is listed in that bibliography, as well as some of those sort of women's Victorian writing pieces that could be useful for people to have a look at. And again, happy to add to this as it goes through, because as I say, we want to update this every 3 to 6 months. But I think the sort of the golden nugget in all of this is all of the actual articles and pieces alongside the women's attributions themselves. I'm aware that we started a bit late, obviously, but I want to ensure we've got time for questions, because I'm sure other people may need to go at 5 o'clock. So if we finish there and then open up for any questions, then I will hand back to Prithi as the chair.
Thank you so much, Claire and Emily and Anne. Yes, let's give them a round of applause on our screens if you'd like. So yes, I will open. And I was going to say, raise your either your digital hands or your real hands. And I see already, let's see, Wolfgang has their hand up. So go ahead if you want to unmute and ask your question. You can also
use... just press the wrong button. No, don't worry.
Oh, that's the wrong button. Okay. Wolfgang does not want to ask a question, but feel free to, you can ask your question in the chat if you'd like, and I can read it out, or if you would like to raise your digital hand, that way people get in order, or if you want to raise, if your camera is on and you want to raise your live human hand, you can do that too. Sorry. Turn my sound off. Craig has a hand raised.
Part of this is just congratulations. This is magnificent to see this kind of production coming together. My question was actually more fine-grained in terms of the searching. I was wondering to what degree the images that have been produced are searchable through OCR, to what degree you can actually draw on the text or actually move around in the theme sites to be able to follow those kinds of things.
That's a really good question. Thanks. Anne, did you want to answer on this? We'd had set this discussion up about OCR and Wix, didn't we?
Yes, yeah, and yeah, we were aware of that right through the project. We knew that the text wasn't searchable. Unfortunately, can't get it to work because we've got multiple exhibitions on this site. Just restricting that to this one exhibition was really quite difficult. So I am looking into it, and I think the only way to do it may be to do a PDF of each image rather than JPEGs, and see whether we can get some technology that will read through. But at the moment, no, we just can't do it. I don't know whether we can have access to the, the transcription or the OCR that's been done on other projects, and then we can just copy and paste it over so it sits there. Then that would be searchable. But as for now, I've checked on Wix and they don't have an OCR app to do that for these images. Although they are bringing in AI all the time. So, with time, maybe AI can search a digital image for text. Maybe it's not that far away.
Thank you.
I think it's...
Sorry, thank you. I was worried about the JPEGs, and yeah, it's the JPEGs. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's as well, because this is something we want to evolve. I think that the main thing we wanted to do was get the information out there so that people could search it. It may be that now that we've got this sort of pilot site up and running, that we can sort of look at grants for doing some of that transcription within it. So it's definitely something I think that we're looking to do. It's finding the way to do it, and if it has to be manual as part of sort of a separate sort of grant that comes from the pilot, then we'll be working with that as well.
So Paul Fife has a question, a comment, and a question. It's a great project, and thanks for all the context and details. Do you envision a lifespan for this exhibition? What time frame of support has the library committed?
That's a really good question. I think Emily may be best to answer that. One thing that we've done though, Paul, and which we did with the ledgers, which is now sort of over 10 years old, is that we have all of the images in a separate repository. So all of that information is able to be moved across different platforms as needed. So that they are preserved. So we did, for example, when we were using DigiTool way back when we started with the contributor ledgers, that has now gone and moved on, but we've still got that raw data because we've set up a repository to ensure the lifespan of the project. So if it needs to move outside of the Wix platform, we can do that. Emily, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have like a specific lifespan for it. This is a system that we've brought in as the archives for a long term, really. Now, obviously, systems move on and sometimes we might change. And as Claire said, we have all of the raw data, so we could transfer things, but it's definitely not something that's just going to be for like 6 months and then it will disappear. We've no plans to do that. What probably will happen long term is that once our next exhibition goes onto this site, the Punch exhibition will be then in like the other exhibitions at the bottom. So we have past exhibitions as a separate section. So what will probably happen over time is that there'll be a new exhibition, that'll be the front page, but you'll still be able to get to it from there. So the link will still take you to the main site.
Thanks, Paul. hand over back to Brithy.
Thank you. Other questions or comments or thoughts? I see Carolyn Ultron has written, and I don't know exactly what part, but it was towards the end. This feels like a game changer, and that got some hearts and thumbs up. So I don't know if you want to say more, Carolyn, or if others want to come in and ask any questions. We have a minute or two.
I meant the whole thing. Actually, I nearly failed completely to unmute myself. So I've been telling myself, it was just watching all coming through, just seeing the exhibition and seeing. I love the way that it's going to be possible to download articles from there. It's just a simple thing, but when I'm working on the British Library newspaper archive, it's very nice to be able to download something, put it in a folder, come back to it without having to try and remember what it was I saw, whether I need to see it again, where it was. It all just feels very generous.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Okay.
I think that's the spirit we were aiming for, to inspire inclusion, inclusivity within that Women's Day. And I think that there's just some really interesting pieces when we start to have a look, and some of those women contributors who may only have 3 or 4 pieces, and you think, oh, well, they obviously weren't main contributors, and you go and look and they're sort of full page pieces, so they're not small pieces that they're contributing, they're quite significant, and some of the commentary that they're making in it, I think, will be really interesting to unpack. So I wanted to open that up to bring in people like Katie, who's working on similar things with me, and start to open this up to that wider community. There's a lot of people that's doing great work on women's periodicals, and I think that if we can bring all those voices together, it'll really sort of change how we're looking at Punch, particularly in the 1890s.
Lorraine has a question. Lorraine, do you want me to read it, or do you want to unmute and not? Okay, so Lorraine says, congratulations on this marvelous and timely project. Kudos to all involved, exclamation point. I'd love it if you could say a little more about the process and protocols you use to guide the tagging of items using the IWD themes of hope, justice and dignity, purity, society, and community. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Lorraine. That means a lot, particularly given sort of some of the digital projects and work that you've been doing. I think with doing them, I think there is a context for each piece of how I've sort of interpreted hope, purity, justice, and dignity. But I do see scope for perhaps being more specific, and even for there being sort of a project in how justice and dignity within the period and within those pieces are articulated. The main thing I wanted to do is get the material out there, but I think there's still work to be added to this, and more research about what these themes mean. But it was me going through sort of page by page and attributing them. And as I say, there are some details on the page about that, but there's probably more to do to make it seem less arbitrary than it may do at the moment. But the aim was to get this done for International Women's Day, and then to sort of continue to work and build on that as we go forward.
Can I ask a quick supplementary?
Yeah.
It's such an interesting project, and I love the IWD connection, but I'm just curious if there's one theme in your experience of tagging that is bigger than others.
Very much so. It's the social and community, and I think very much, as I said, fits in with the work that Alexis Easley's done around celebrity. Is quite interesting. The way that the term celebrity is being used, particularly people like Ada Levison across both Punch and the Yellow Book. So definitely the social and the community side of it.
Thanks again. It's a great project. Thanks.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Well, the reference to Alexis Easley leads me to what I want to say next. So before we thank Claire, Emily, and Anne, let me just quickly say that Digital Events' next event is on Friday, April 12th, same time, same place, although you have to register. And we are going to have an event called The Future of Periodical Studies. It's a conversation with current and former editors of VPR. We will have Catherine Ledbetter, Alexis Easley, both of whom have been former editors of VPR, and then the current editor, Kathy Malone, and Leslie Housam, who was here a minute ago, will moderate that conversation, and we will talk about the last 2 decades. They will talk about the last 2 decades of scholarship and how our field has changed. So please do join us. You'll see registration links. You'll have to register. Let me also just take this moment to quickly say that if you are not a member of RSVP, please join. It's a mere $25, which I think is about 25 pence in the UK. So it's not a lot of money. Maybe not so, Laurel. Maybe the exchange rate is, yeah. So, but please do join. Let me then just say, please, let's thank Claire, Emily, and Anne for not only sharing their work, but for their wonderful work here. So,
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's kind. Nice.
and I think you can stop recording, Fanula.